What's up, guys? Today I'm going to be starting a video series on a beginner's guide to planted tanks, basically. So if you're a pro aquascaper, if you've been doing this for a really long time, and you already know what kind of substrates, what kind of lighting you like, what kind of CO2 setups you like, all that kind of stuff, this isn't for you. This is for the beginner aquascaper or planted tank enthusiast who wants to learn more, try to figure out if they're doing something wrong, what that might be, and just kind of an all-around kind of guide to the basics, basically. So to start out, there are two basic types of planted tank or of substrates. If I didn't say, this is going to be the substrate video. I'm going to do, like I said, a series. So substrates, filtration, lighting, maybe nutrients, maybe stocking, algae control. If something's requested, I'll do a video on it. But yeah, like I said, there are two basic types of substrates. There are organic substrates and inorganic substrates. Your organic substrates are going to be your dirt, your ADA Amazonia, fluvio stratum, it's a really popular one, Tropica, UNS contra soil. So we'll talk about those later. But those are basically, yeah, we'll talk about them later. Inorganics are going to be, your sand, gravel, fluorite, Floramax, Eco-Complete, stuff like that. And the main difference between those two is that the inorganics are typically inert. There's not really a lot of nutrient content in those. Whereas organic substrates typically have very high nutrient content. And it's night and day. So basically, if you're using an inorganic substrate, you're going to have to utilize the nitrogen cycle to provide plant for your foods. A lot of people will fill up a tank with Eco-Complete and all their plants will melt and they'll be like, what's going on? What am I doing wrong? And then it's not really your fault, it's just that there's not a lot of nutrient content in that. So if you're ever using inorganic substrates, which I've done a lot, you're going to want to use root tabs, or you're going to want to put dirt or an organic substrate underneath it to provide that nutrient content that the organic or inorganic substrate is lacking. I keep mixing those up. But basically the best ones out there are going to be gravel with a soil underneath it, like dirt, or Eco-Complete, Floramax, those. You have to use root tabs with those, or dirt underneath, or just an organic substrate underneath, because they don't have nutrients in them. They utilize the nitrogen cycle. You have to have bacteria in your substrate, and you have to have waste coming into your substrate that bacteria can convert into plant food for your plants to get nutrients. Otherwise, if there's no waste coming in and bacteria living in the substrate, it's not producing any plant food. It's not producing any nitrate or anything like that. And it can produce phosphorus, nitrogen, that kind of stuff, but there are other macro and micronutrients that your plants need. So root tabs are not necessarily, you can get away without them, but they're going to help you a lot. Sand. If you're the guy out there who's like, I love sand for planted tanks. I grow Ludwigia repens like crazy in my sandy tank. No, sand sucks. The only reason sand exists in my aquascaping toolbox, essentially, is I use sand where I don't want plant growth, where I want negative space, where I don't want there to be any plants, and where I'm trying to create contrast and emphasis on the empty space. That is the only times that I ever use sand. Other than sometimes I'll blend sandy negative space into the substrate just by sprinkling sand on top. But don't use sand. If you have sand, you think it's working, it's going to work better without it. Sand just doesn't allow for bacteria to colonize it very well. It doesn't have any circulation. If you see any guys in like fish tanking or fish tank videos, like fish keepers and stuff like that, and they're ever using sand, it's a very, very thin layer. You don't want deep sand because it goes anaerobic. It's not good for holding nutrients. It's not good for growing plants. Capping organic substrates and stuff occasionally can go okay, but it's not gonna work good. The downside is it's really easy to plant into sand. So it can be tempting, but it just doesn't really work very well. It's not a good substrate. But yeah, so that's the basics for inorganics. You have to use root tabs or something like that to provide that immediate nutrient content because it just doesn't have it. If you use root tabs initially and stop using root tabs, that can usually go pretty well. I mean, like I said, the bacteria is just going to continuously provide plant food through the waste that goes into your tank. If you're constantly doing water changes and cleaning out the substrate, it's not going to do that well of it. Obviously, you need to do water changes to keep the tank clean, but if you're doing excessive water changes with a substrate like that, it's going to make the substrate less efficient because the bacteria is getting less food, basically. Another really, like the main point in substrates like this is circulation. To have a healthy substrate, you need circulation. So you need waste going in and plant food coming out. You need water to flow through substrate. Yes, water flows through your substrate. That's why sand is bad, because it doesn't allow for that. You want porous, fairly large particle size stuff to allow adequate flow. If you're wondering about sloping tanks and how people do really deep substrates while maintaining circulation, I'll get into that later after I talk about dirt. But that's the gist. You have to add nutrients to inorganics for plants to grow properly. So root tabs, dirt, stuff like that. That's the gist. Organic substrates are basically your dirt, ADA, Amazonia, stratum, that kind of stuff. And dirt is obviously just dirt, but the other ones are basically like a specific mixture of dirt that's composed of a bunch of macro and micronutrients that this company came up with that they think is best for your plants. And they compact that and bake it into little balls, and then they put all those little balls into a bag, and that's what you buy. You buy cooked dirt, basically. And it works great because it's just super nutrient rich, and it isn't mud like dirt would be if you just put water with dirt. The downside, the only real downside, is that over time they will break down. ADA has had a problem with that recently where they prematurely break down. So naturally they'll break down over the course of a few years, 3 or 4 years. That's on the high end, if you don't disturb the substrate a lot. So if you have any kind of hardscape, or if you're constantly removing and planting stuff, moving the substrate around, it's going to speed up that process. ADA has had a problem where it's disintegrated in a matter of months, which is awful. I think they took care of it, but I'm not sure. I've always heard complaints about it, but I've also heard very, very, very good things about ADA as well. Everyone that I know that uses ADA loves ADA. The other one, like the main other competitor to ADA, is ContraSoil. My buddy Mark, TMK Aquarist, uses or likes ContraSoil. That's the one. That's the commercial organic substrate that he suggested to me. I have other friends, Shrimpery, my buddy David. They use ADA. They want me to use ADA. But ContraSoil is less messy, and it lasts longer, and it's hard to decide. But if you use either of those, you're not going to have a problem growing plants. They have a lot of nutrient content. The only thing you want to make sure you do is when you first set up a tank with organic substrates, all of that nutrient content is going to leach a little bit into the water column, and if you don't do constant water changes, you're going to get algae blooms, which is what you really don't want. So for the first 2 weeks, usually, it's around that time period, you want to do just tons and tons of water changes, or just have lots of floating plants and stuff to soak up excess nutrients. If you go the floating plant route, you're still going to have to do water changes. It's just going to make it less frequent in the first few weeks. But that will go away after a few weeks. It's just going to be immediately, it's going to have a ton of nutrients in the water, and then over time it'll kind of level off. But they're great substrates. You can't really go wrong with them. It's just they don't last forever. So a good way to get around that is they will turn to mud, like basically dirt, but you want to cap that stuff. So in my cryptocorn tank, I'm going to be using a bunch of gravel basically to create a slope. I'll get into that in a second. But then ContraSoil on top of that, and then Eco-Complete on top of that, and then ADA Colorado sand for the areas where I don't want plant growth. Basically, the idea behind that is I hope to have that tank up for a long time, and I'll probably be removing plants occasionally because it's just going to get overgrown. And when I remove plants and when I disturb the substrate, it's going to turn into mud over time. And I don't want that mud to just kind of be on the surface and floating out into the tank and making it all cloudy. So that's the reason you would cap a substrate like that. Getting into dirt, there's a specific process that you want to use when using dirt in a tank. It's called mineralization. The first things first, when picking out your dirt, you want to buy organic dirts. Potting soil is usually the best. Miracle-Gro organic. I have a bunch of random organic composty stuff that I use for tanks. The main thing is, though, it has to be organic. You don't want time-release fertilizers. You don't want pesticides. If you're collecting dirt from somewhere, make sure it's somewhere that's not getting any fertilizer or pesticides, because it'll damage your tank and it'll create algae blooms if there's fertilizers in there. So that's the gist of collecting it. Then once you have your dirt, you want to kind of filter out all the like wood chips and random stuff in there. You just want the dirt. So once you get that, mineralization is where you basically lay the dirt out in the sun, soak it with a hose, let it evaporate, soak it with a hose, let it evaporate, and just keep doing that for the period of a couple days. Usually works fine. I like to lay a tarp down so I don't just rinse the dirt away, and it makes it easier to collect. The point of that is to jumpstart the nitrogen cycle in the dirt. It makes the soil bioactive and it just really kickstarts all the bacterial activity. And when you put that into the tank, it's already cycled. Essentially your soil is cycled. And then obviously you want to cap that, because you don't want to just have mud in the bottom of your tank. It's going to make a mess. The best materials, or the best things to cap dirt with is, I've talked to an aquascaper from the UK a lot about this in the past. He does really good no-tech setups with dirt and stuff. And the best way we've kind of discussed is you want to do a 1-to-1 ratio of your dirt to your cap. And the best cap is a 2 to 4 millimeter particle size, natural small pea gravel. So natural colors, rounded edges, just good small pea gravel. Allows a lot of circulation while still keeping the mud from basically coming into your water column. And that's basically all a cap really does. It just keeps everything down. Downsides to dirt is it's messy. If anyone says you can do it without it being messy, it's going to be a little bit messier than typical substrates. When you fill up a dirted tank, it'll be a little bit messy, a little bit cloudy for a few days typically. But just do a few more water changes and put a little bit of extra filter floss in your filter, and it should clear up in a few days. Other than that, if you have like a crypt in a dirted tank and you pull it out, crypts have huge root structures, same thing with swords and a bunch of other plants, I'm sure you know. It's going to pull all that dirt into your water column. It's going to make your tank extremely cloudy for a few days. But I mean, other than that, it's super nutrient rich, super natural, and it makes for a really healthy tank. Mark TMK, I'm pretty sure that's what he suggested when I asked him what his favorite substrate was. I've used dirt a lot in the past as well, though, with incredible results. I love using dirt. It's one of my favorite substrates. The only reason I'm not using it in there is because I know I'm going to be pulling out crypts and it's going to make a mess. But yeah, I can't really think of anything else. Sloping substrates. That's the last thing, and then we'll call it at there. If anybody has any other questions, just leave them though, and I'll answer those questions there. I'm trying to keep this short and sweet. Sloping substrates. If you look at aquascapers, and you'll see their tanks typically aren't flat. If you're setting up a tank and you want to make it look good, that's just, pro tip, don't make it flat. It's not going to look very good. Unless you're actively trying to create like contrast and have a flat area, don't use flat substrates. It just doesn't look very good. But a good tip to create depth in an aquascape is to slope the substrate towards the back of the tank. Works great. If you look at, really good aquascapers, you'll see them do that often. Sloping just creates more contrast and creates more character in the aquascape. It gives it more to look at, and it looks good. But basically, how you keep, like I said, you don't want deep substrates earlier because it'll go anaerobic. But basically, there are a few ways to have a really deep substrate without causing problems. My preferred way that I've always used is using like big gravel. Well, not big gravel, but drainage rocks, like probably 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch size particle gravel, and you just create your slope with that, and then you put your substrate on top of that. So the whole point of that and having a larger particle size is it allows a lot of circulation through it. So it's going to be very hard to make that anaerobic. So as long as the substrate on top is has a good circulation, that stuff down below, it's not going to have a problem. Another good one is pumice, volcanic rock that's extremely porous, so you can have a lot of bacterial activity in there, and it's big particles, so it's going to have a lot of circulation through there as well. Other ways, you can just stick stones at the bottom and just kind of stack stuff on top of it. The downside to that is at the bottom of the stones, you're going to have soil that seeps down into there, and that can go anaerobic. So you can kind of fill those voids with maybe like spray foam or something like that, or you can create a slope of spray foam. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do that, but it's entirely possible. The other way is using like stacking lighting diffuser and just creating like structures out of plastic essentially, and then putting your substrate on top of that. But I mean, you can get creative with it. You can, if you find out a different way, go for it. Nobody's stopping you. But yeah, that's the gist, I guess. Inorganic substrates, use root tabs or dirt underneath. Organic substrates, you're going to plant extremely heavily. Another really important thing, plant very heavily if you're using dirt or anything like that, because you're going to have so many nutrients into the water column immediately, and do a lot of water changes to keep from getting algae blooms. But as long as you follow that stuff and kind of use this information however you think you should be good. If anybody has any questions, leave them below in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time.